welcome back to another episode of the One of Us podcast. We're so excited that you're here with us today. Today we have a good topic for you guys. In the coming holiday season, we're going to be talking about the importance of Sabbath, just digging into what Sabbath is, the importance of it, especially in busier seasons of life, such as the holiday season when there's so much going on. And so I'm excited to hear your guys' perspectives, dig into just the biblical outlook on it. So let's do this thing. Also, sorry to anyone who's watching on YouTube that I have like this rat's nest on top of my head, but here we are today.
First question, what is Sabbath?
So when I was looking into just the actual term Sabbath or Shabbat, however you want to say it, it literally means like stop, dwell, settle, cease. So it's the act of just basically essentially just stopping what you normally do in this situation to work and deciding to plug in to other things. What are your guys' perspectives on what the Sabbath is?
So, if we're not talking about actual definitions and what it kind of means to us, Sabbath is more of a day of rest, a time to rest, a time to relax. Obviously, there's more that goes into it because the Lord Jesus has talking about Sabbath and what happens, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But for me, a Sabbath is just a time to really relax. I usually try and spend it by like going to like a coffee shop and reading my word, or maybe just sleeping in a little bit longer with, busy weeks and everything. So that tends to be what my Sabbath day is a day to recharge.
And you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but really the Sabbath starts all the way in the beginning of the Bible, right? In Genesis 2, where we see the creation of the earth, right? That the earth was created in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God the Father rested, right? And then this idea of Sabbath for the people really got implemented um, when the Israelites were taken out of Egypt. And the Lord gave the commandments through Moses to say, hey, y'all need to Sabbath, y'all need to rest. And really it was a gift to the people because for so long they had been slaves, so there's no days of rest, right? So this idea of like, no, like now this is the gift that you've been given, like rest from all things on the seventh day.
Yeah, I really like the where you guys are kind of heading here. Obviously, if God created, the creation story in 7 days, the whole universe, and on the seventh day he rested, that's something that was modeled not just by God, but also Jesus and throughout the Old and New Testament. So it's definitely something that we should be practicing as Christians and believers today. And I think that it's something that really it's really important in our life in this culture, right? In the United States, there's such a culture built on grind, right? Grinding it out, working till, your nails fall off type deal. Just, I think that this podcast should really serve anyone listening on how to really take that day of rest and worship to be rejuvenated before such a busy holiday season. And we're all going to have a busy holiday season, you know what I mean? Whether you spend time with family or friends. And my prayer is that as we kind of continue this conversation, that you would get a little bit tidbits of what we're saying is helping you in yours endeavors.
Yeah, it's really funny because this morning I got a DM from a friend of mine and she sent me this cute little comic thing. I just pulled it up on my phone on how her therapist had asked her write down 3 things outside of work that defines who you are. And it just kind of goes along the story of how they cut it. And I know for me that's something that I tend to struggle with is because work is such a big portion of your life, and we spend like 8 hours a day, sometimes a little bit more doing work. It's hard to sometimes really rest and take that Sabbath. And I think right now, like, I am in that season of resting a little bit, and I'm learning where the boundaries I need to have for work are. So I want to transition that how do you guys kind of do that in terms of work?
I think something that I took a lot from, and this is what Arturo, one of my best friends, says, our best friend says, and shameless plug, listen to his interview. Previous episode was really great. He kind of talked a lot about working in ministry, but something that he said that really impacted me is kind of like in this world, you have to make the time to do anything, including make time to rest, make time to Sabbath. So I think that um, this is kind of like a game of priorities. If you're super busy at your job, I think what I would do is tell myself, hey, I have responsibilities at work. If they're manageable, then my priority is going to be God and that day of Sabbath, or Sabbathing in a fashion to get me recharged for the weeks ahead.
For me, I'm someone that, I work Monday through Friday, but oftentimes I'm on call as well or have to do things over the weekend. And so when you asked this question, Tati, I thought of the fact that sometimes Sabbath for some people isn't going to occur on the same day every week or isn't going to occur in the same time frame every week because, schedules change. And I think that's what you're getting at. But for me, something that I really have been trying to implement is at the very minimum a half day of unplugging from all things work related, and being very like serious about that and prioritizing that. And so that's something that I've been doing. Sometimes that's the first half of a Saturday or the second half of a Sunday. And I think too, rest doesn't have to be sleeping. That's not what rest means. Um, it's just doing things where I think really what Sabbath is unplugging from the world a little bit so you can plug into the Lord, right? So you can engage in worship and you can engage in the things that just like the delights of your heart and in honoring God as well. And rest is not only for your physical body but also for your spiritual health, your emotional health. And so really for me, a lot of that has to do with time with community. A lot of that has to do with not having like, I need to be at this place at 2 p.m. at 3 p.m. Like if I'm with someone, if I'm doing something, it's chill vibes. Like I don't have anywhere I need to be, but I have places that I choose to be. So um, that's kind of how it's looked for me in this season.
When you guys don't get a good Sabbath or don't really have a chance to rest, how does that make you guys feel, especially when you know like a busier season's coming up?
For me, when I don't have a chance to rest or Sabbath, I really feel it in what I engage in throughout the week. So oftentimes if like a portion of the weekend I really wasn't able to recharge or I didn't prioritize that time as much, during the week I feel like in order to rest, quote unquote, I veg out, which is not restful. It's not true rest. That's fake rest. So that's kind of what I find myself doing. And so that's why I really try to prioritize that time so that I don't just feel at the at my wits end in everything going on in my life.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it tends to affect a lot of areas in my life because I get burnt out kind of easy because I tend to do a lot. Um, but I do see the impacts that it has kind of like the season that I have with the Lord because sometimes when you're overdoing it so much and you don't have time to rest, it's easy to put, unfortunately, God in the back burner, which it shouldn't be like that. It should be the complete opposite. But yeah, I get overwhelmed, I get stressed easily. But when I balance the two very well, I feel like quality of life gets better, my relationship with the Lord is better, my relationship with others are better.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with John Mark Comer, but he is an author and pastor, and he wrote some pretty popular books. One is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and the other one is Practicing the Way. At least those are the ones I'm familiar with. I haven't actually read either of them, but I want to. But I've watched kind of he does like sermon series on them. But he describes Sabbath like this. Obviously, this is not it stems from the Bible, but it's just a way to see and view the Sabbath. He says it's 4 parts. The first one is you stop. The second one is you rest. The third one is you delight. And the fourth one is you worship. He says, like, those are the elements of the Sabbath. So for you guys, what are some things that you absolutely stop doing? And maybe if you haven't initiated this yet, what are some things as you move forward in your Sabbath journey that you want to stop during that period of time?
I think honestly, anything that involves you to be drained, and not everything that drains you could be a bad thing. Sometimes, you could be the family planner and your family is constantly, needing your assistance in planning an event, or they need your energy to kind of make the family event really memorable. I think sometimes you need to remind yourself that you're human and you can't constantly give out. I think a lot of times, we read this in my Bible study earlier this week about the woman in the well, the Samaritan woman, how Jesus told her that he has the everlasting life, everlasting water, the living water. And I think about how, we have so many limits and God is so limitless. And it's just a strong reminder for me when I Sabbath to realize like the strength of which I draw from must come from God for me to go through the day. If not, we live in such a burnout culture that almost anything that you find relatively enjoyable in the beginning eventually will burn you out if you're not taking care of your spiritual and mental health well. So I would say what I need to stop, or anyone should stop, is anything that's causing an immense amount of attention or drain.
That's good. And then on the point of like, we talked about rest already. On the point of delighting, what are things that you guys engage in or want to engage in during that time?
I think during my, time of rest, the things that I look to engage more in is worship. One thing I love to do is I love to turn all the lights off in the house, light a couple of candles, and blast the music as loud as it can go, and just putting the lyrics on. And I'll have my Bible, I'll have a journal. So I kind of set up like center. In case you all don't know, I'm also a preschool teacher. So I make centers for myself that I can go to. And like I'll have another area where I've like I want to get down on my hands and knees. I put a yoga mat down, make it nice and comfy. But those are things that I really draw to just because I feel like everything else outside and kind of like Crystal was saying earlier, just, unplugging from the world. I feel like that's where I truly unplug the world and like really plug in with God. And so those are the things. And, because when I feel like I'm resting, I'm not really looking to get physical rest, more so spiritual. And that's the thing that I use to, or that's the thing that I go to the most.
Well, I like what you're saying about delight. I think something that everyone should practice in Sabbath is to delight in Thanksgiving, right? I think too much of our livelihood, we think about the things that we don't have, the things that we wish we had, and the things that, we want to achieve. And that's all a breeding ground to kind of cause a spirit of covetousness, right? Kind of like building comparisons and bringing you down. And a lot of times in the day to day, we can feel discouraged um, living life. So when we Sabbath, I think something that I delight in the most is everything that the Lord has given me. God gave me another week. Our pastor here in Las Vegas, he likes to say, like, hey, you made it to another Sunday. Some people don't have that luxury. And I think just realizing like every breath that we get is a gift from God, that we have, a roof over our head, that we have food, that we have the facilities to do great things. So I like to delight in Thanksgiving. And I feel like in those moments, it really rejuvenates me to think about the days ahead.
And I think that's a great point, Juan, too, because the Sabbath isn't only to rest from the week that you just had, it's really to rest for the week that you're going to have next. And so really preparing your heart in Thanksgiving, I think is so healthy. And as you guys know, Exodus 20:11, right? The Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. So it's really a holy time to, like what Vic was saying, engage in worship. Like Juan was saying, engage in Thanksgiving and do these things to really just glorify God with what He's given us, where He has put us, and really recharges us to conquer what's ahead.
So, what do you guys think about this? I know this might be a controversial topic, but what do you think about people taking a Sabbath on different days? Do you think it matters what day you take a Sabbath, or is it whenever you get the chance?
I don't think it necessarily matters what day. I know stereotypically what was done was sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. But realistically, as we know, when Jesus came, he fulfilled the law. So he fulfilled the Sabbath because he ultimately is our rest. And so the Sabbath is still, like we're saying, is still holy, is still a great thing that Christians should engage in. It's still, a command that was fulfilled by Jesus. But the times necessarily matter.
Yeah, I think Crystal covered it. I don't think it matters if you do it on a Saturday, you do it on a Sunday.
It doesn't matter what day it is, as long as I think the importance is as long as you take the time to Sabbath. That's what's the most important.
And I think something that's interesting here is some people can take the Sabbath and run with it. Like I know there's different like cults or different groups out there, religious groups that will say the Sabbath is like the most important thing ever. And if you don't do the Sabbath, like you're a heathen basically. And something that I was looking at when I was doing kind of my research for this was what Jesus said about the Sabbath. Specifically in Matthew, do you guys remember when one of the disciples like picked a grain of something or a wheat field or something like that, and then all the Pharisees were like, absolutely not, what are you doing on the Sabbath? And essentially this is where Jesus kind of talks about how the Sabbath is for man, right? Not man for the Sabbath. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
What he was trying to do is kind of destroy the Pharisees' construction of legalism around the Sabbath, right? So the Sabbath is to help us as limited humans draw our source from a limitless supply of God through rest and worship and delight. And what has happened is some people have made the instance of Sabbath like above where you're drawing that rejuvenation from. So I think Jesus is trying to say like, hey, like don't legalize this. It's not about, yeah, I think he was like breaking down tradition, right? Like you'll hear some people in other sects of faith say like you have to, tithe X amount to be in right standing with the Lord, when a lot of that is built by man, not actually a commandment of God. Although you should tithe, not trying to throw tithing under the bus for a spiritual matter. But I guess to wrap up, what I'm just trying to say is I think Jesus is tearing down the legalism that the Pharisees are building on people. And also, I guess just to also add on, I think when Crystal, you're saying like Sabbath was for man, not man for the Sabbath, I think a lot about how you utilize that time, right? Sometimes people use their quote unquote Sabbath to work on things that are not what they usually do. And they work on other projects they have that they haven't hit that burnout limit on. And I think that's not really taking a Sabbath. That's just you refocusing your, I guess, grind culture, your determination elsewhere. When it's truly about, worship, delight, rest. Something that I take akin to is, if you're taking a day of rest and you're just watching like mindless videos, or you're, doing something that isn't necessarily drawing you closer to the presence of Christ or rejuvenating you or giving you rest, I don't think that's actually a form of Sabbath. I think you're just practicing what you were doing before, just in a different way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a Bible verse that I thought of that kind of encapsulates the last portion of what we've been talking about is Matthew 11:28 and 29. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And I think really that encapsulates the idea that the Sabbath is supposed to be a blessing, not a burden. And that just leaning into the Lord and leaning into Jesus is truly where we find our true rest. Because ultimately, like what you were saying, Juan, even mentioning tithing, like just like all of our money belongs to the Lord, and the Lord is asking for us to, you know, provide a percentage back for the kingdom. It's the same with our time. All of our time belongs to the Lord. And really, God is encouraging us, right, to give a portion of that time up really for our benefit, but to honor God, right, and to glorify God.
So, why do you guys think that it might be difficult for some people to rest? I feel like when I'm in a really busy season, that is something that I sometimes struggle with. Just because I know of like everything that I have to do. Sometimes it can just be hard to like sit and like know that I just should take a day to rest when I have so much on my plate.
Honestly, I think sometimes when you're working and you're busy, you don't even realize it. Like we all fall short of God's glory, and I think you can plan it 10 times and you're failing it. I think you need to get help, either in accountability, or if you're a friend of somebody that you know they're just working themselves into the ground, to just encourage them to, take some rest in the Lord.
I was going to say, I think with that, there's always going to be something. When you finish one task, there's going to be another task waiting. When you finish that one, there's going to be another one waiting. When something happens, something else happens. Again, I don't think we should get into the habit of saying, like, I'm busy, I'm busy. I think it's important. Life is going to keep going no matter what you do or what you don't do. But I think it's important to just slow down, because sometimes if we're so focused and worried about tomorrow, we forget about what's happening today. And I think it's important to just slow down, relax, and be present and allow the Lord to fill you up. Because in order for you to even step into the next day and step into the next task and, whatever is ahead of you for work or relationships or anything, you're going to need that spiritual rest and allow that time for the Lord to speak to you, to give you direction, discernment, and wisdom on what to do next to actually succeed in those areas. So I understand things, can get busy. I know, like, I've done it too. They get hectic, but just slow down and just take a minute. The stuff will always be there, but allow yourself the time, because you also want to avoid burnout. And whatever you do, you want to do it well. So allow yourself a minute to just be at peace and allow the Lord to take care of you and fill you up in that time of rest so that you can do those tasks well.
Okay, I have a genuine question. It just came up to me in the moment, but do you think you can Sabbath with friends or Sabbath with family?
I think Sabbath was like, look historically, look at how Jesus Sabbath begun with community. That's how it started. You all feast together, get around a table together. I think community is a huge part of Sabbath. Yes, I'm sure there's, it's supposed to be a 24-hour period. I'm sure at certain points in that 24-hour period, like, you're just alone with the Lord, right? But I do think a big part of the Sabbath is gathering. And I just think it's a part of it historically, biblically, and it's the way Jesus took part of it too.
To answer your original question of what you asked, if you can take a Sabbath with friends and family, I think 100% you can. Because I think even in that time, God can use people to speak to you. And, there are some people who get joy about with being around people, and not just around like anyone, but their close community and their friendships and their relationships. And, even I have a story here, so I'm going to read it and then finish my thought. But it's Luke 13, verses 10 through 17. A woman with a disabling spirit. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, Woman, you are freed from your disability. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and she glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. Then the Lord answered him, You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? And he said these things. All his adversaries were put to shame, and all the people rejoiced at all the glorious things that were done by him. I think even in that, Jesus could have been taking a Sabbath and doing his own thing, but he decided to be around the people that he loved and to serve them in some way. And I'm sure, that brought a lot of joy to Jesus himself. So just to kind of really, solidify, I do think you can be around people on the Sabbath.
I want to circle back to an earlier question of yours, Tati, and maybe get your guys' thoughts on this perspective of, when people say, they're in the kind of working mode and there's no time. I just think it's really important to maybe have a moment of self-reflection of saying, like, am I making an idol of my work? Am I making an idol of being busy or the grind? I know, especially in like the Western world, that's something that's glorified, just being busy and not having time. But in reality, that's not healthy and that's not God's best for us. And I heard a quote once said by a pastor. He said, if the devil can't destroy you, he'll distract you. And I think work is something we're called to do, but too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And it can also serve as a distraction. And so I think it's important for people listening and just us here as well to maybe self reflect and say, am I making my work, am I making my job title who I am and my identity? Because I think that could really stop people from engaging in rest, because the world, our society defines rest sometimes as being lazy, or like there's so many other things you could be doing, you need to be productive, when really we're here to care for our souls, and rest with the Lord, which is way more important, and it is God's best for us. And we've all said it, even earlier in the episode, that we're not at our best when we haven't rested with the Lord. And you could tell just how you start to act, the things you start to say, maybe the things you start to engage in, or your energy levels. So I just really encourage people to maybe just think about that. Think about why there's no time. And obviously, life gets busy, but you can always set apart a portion of your day, put boundaries around your day, or maybe ask other people to help you. If you have kids, being like, hey, friend, can you take care of my kids for like 5 hours, 4 hours on this day so that I can, Sabbath or whatever that looks like, even if it's 2 hours, right? Ideally more time, but there's always a way, I'd say. Do you guys find that that's pretty common in the culture?
Yeah, definitely. Very big. Um, Again, I think it's just asking. I think you hit it on the head. Is it an idol? And again, it's some of those things where you have to swallow your own pride and realize that maybe your priorities, although some priorities are good, they're just not placed in the right ordering. So you just have to kind of get them in the right way.
I know we mentioned previously some ways that people can practically engage in a Sabbath, but I just wanted to mention some more that I've been thinking about, and as I've spoken to people on this subject that they've mentioned to me. But, when people do a Sabbath, a lot of time what we've been saying, they detach, right? Or they don't engage in things that require work, like what you were saying, Juan, or require like a lot of like exertion or energy. That could be cooking, like saying this one day out of the week, I'm not going to cook. Maybe that means you go out to restaurants. Maybe that means the other days of the week you cook to make up for that day. Or if you've got to do chores around the house, maybe you do those during the week and try to keep your weekend, at least a portion of your weekend, free in that area. I'd say the same with errands. And so I think you got to kind of have some thought process in this and try to really organize your schedule a little bit better so that that day is truly restful, because sometimes there's so many other things in life that you have to do. I'm sure there's plenty of things on your to-do list, but if you kind of do it slowly, like if there's a big task you have to do or a big errand, maybe splitting them up in fours and you do like a portion of it every day of the week or something like that. Those are things that I thought of. What are some other areas practically that people can do to ensure that their time period is really being utilized?
I think if you have a good sleep schedule, I know some people they like to wake up a lot earlier in the day to spend time with the Lord, have a devotion. I think if you're a morning person, that's great. I met some people who say they Sabbath at night, but um, every time I talk to someone who practices their devotions or stuff like that at night, I think it's maybe an easier temptation to just go to bed or call it quits. So it's not really intentional time with the Lord. So that's one practical way that I see. And I think another practical way that comes off of the top of my mind is your first day off of work to spend that day just with the Lord in rest, reading your word, and worshiping the way that you know how.
There is something special about just opening up your physical Bible because we're on our phones all day, every day. We're looking at screens all the time. It's nice to just move away from that and just opening up your physical Bible and just taking a step back, because I think sometimes we become a little too reliant. And I get it. A lot of, the feed and a lot of the, videos on my Instagram and TikTok are, are things, but those are, I'm scrolling and I'm just looking at them and I'm scrolling. I'm like, okay, cool. I read that. That's a beautiful thing. But there's something different about opening your Bible and being intentional in what you're reading, and not just reading a verse, but reading, a couple verses or the chapter, and really allowing it to settle into your heart.
I think too, like a part of unplugging, right, is refraining from doing things that you normally do every single day during the week. If a part of your daily routine is you go and you're scrolling, maybe that's one of the things you should stop doing during the Sabbath. And that's when you engage in things that you delight but don't have the time during the regular week to do. If you love listening to sermons but there is no time during the week, that's something that you can and you get to delight in during the Sabbath. And obviously, this isn't legalistic, this isn't the law, this isn't like robotic of what you should and shouldn't do, but just in order to ensure your maximized rest and really utilizing this time well, I think maybe stopping from engaging in those things, especially regarding social media that can be so distracting and can be time suckers for you, um, if that's something you do normally during the week. I think, too, just as a final thought in this area, I'd encourage people to get outside also during this time of Sabbathing, because really the Sabbath is unity with God, unity with creation, and unity with each other. And so we got that piece of unity with God. That's the whole point of the Sabbath. But also, there's like this unity with creation and just like what Juan was saying, being thankful and being in the Lord's creation and just seeing what He's done. Because we can drive past the Lord's creation every day. We can just be so tunnel visioned in what we have going on that we don't look around and we're like, dang, look at these mountains. Like, dang, look at these animals. They're just going to the park and things like that. Even if you're not an outdoorsy person, maybe just putting a blanket on and reading, because there's something about just being out in what the Lord has made that I think can be really just therapeutic for the soul, really. And then that third piece of unity with one another is what we've talked about of the importance of gathering. So I really hope that you guys were able to take away some nuggets just from this conversation. And I'm sure it'll be an ongoing conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments. And you guys have any additional questions regarding this, let us know. We'd love to know how you also engage in Sabbath, because I know it's different for everyone. But the time has come, people, the time you've all been waiting for. It is Hot Take Time with Tati. Take it over, girl.
Do you think that the Sabbath is optional for Christians today?
Optional. I guess everything in life is optional to the Christian, right? I mean, I would argue that in life, God gave you the option to choose to receive Him. So, yes, it's optional. Is it wise to not Sabbath? Absolutely not wise. Not the move, fam. Please.
I think what you're getting at too, Tati, is the fact that, like what we discussed earlier, like Jesus fulfilled the law and Sabbath was a part of the law. So some people are like, that's an Old Testament thing with Jesus. We no longer need to do it because he fulfilled the law. But, you know, even when you read the New Testament, like Jesus still promotes these things, he still engages in these good spiritual rhythms. And so I think it's definitely something people need to engage in. Like we said, it's not like legalistic in that way, but it's there's wisdom in it. Jesus modeled it for us and it's his best. So why not do it?
Okay, next one. The Sabbath isn't just about rest, it's also about worship.
Truth. I mean, Vic answered that clearly in the past. No, I like what you're saying. I think that was more of a statement than a hot take, honestly. But I get what you're saying. If there's someone out there who like only views the Sabbath to sleep, or like, oh, I'm gonna Sabbath, so I'm just gonna block everyone out and go to bed. I think that honestly, I just think a Sabbath is spending the day with the Lord. You know what I mean? Like how you would go on a date with someone. Like you would give them intentional time. You wouldn't be disrespectful and, have your like eyes on something else while you're spending time with the Lord. You would really be intentional in that. And I think it's just kind of sad, like God is the ruler of all things, and some people are like, oh, I don't know if I can give him like a couple hours out of my day. He's literally the Lord. Like I think it just speaks a lot about the human condition of how sinful we are. So I mean, I would argue that, you know worship and your relationship with the Lord should go beyond the layer of rest.
And I feel like it's such a scheme of the enemy to keep us from Sabbath, honestly. Because if he could get us in this rat race and in this like guinea pig going around in circles and circles and circles with no end, then he succeeds. Because we don't take a time to pause and be like, oh my gosh, like God is such a good God. He is such a good father. He is moving, he is active, and we get the opportunity to be like, Lord, guide me, Lord, show me, Lord, pave the way for my steps. And like what Juan was saying, it's a date. You get to the more you spend time with God, the more you recognize his voice and his spirit and his guiding and how he's moving you. And so I just think it's so important to engage in these things and to engage in the Sabbath, guys. Honestly, like don't get finessed. If you're making excuses time and time again for it, you're getting finessed.
I don't know if it would be considered a hot take, but I was just thinking right now, like, what do you think is the most superior way to rest? I know we briefly talked about our preferences, but like, most common ones.
I think the biggest one is honestly just being with God. And whatever your time with God looks like, that's between you and him, because that's your personal relationship with God. You'll find the thing that works for you too, whether it's journaling, whether it's reading, whether it's worshiping, whether it's just sitting down, in prayer, whatever that may look like. But I think that really just depends on your relationship with God and the way that you two communicate.
I would say just reading the Bible. Like, don't you ever find it funny when people say like, "Oh, how can you hear if God's like speaking to you when he literally left 66 books of him talking directly to you?" So, my prayer is that if you're yearning for some rest, probably reading the Bible. And I know some people are like, "Oh, I read it every day," but maybe during your time of Sabbath you can read aspects of, Proverbs or Thanksgiving, or no, I had a pastor in Reno who'd always say, if you're feeling dread, read the red. So maybe just like reading what the Lord has said. So, yeah, but I love these hot takes, Tati.
All right, everyone. We have reached the end of our podcast, our episode of the Sabbath. Hopefully, you guys were able to take something away from this, and hopefully, you guys are able to take some time to take a Sabbath and take some time to rest. So I hope you guys have that time. We love you. We hope you have an amazing, wonderful rest of the week. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. And we will see you guys next week. Bye.